obviously the news broke yesterday morning at about 10 a.m. where the Justice Department, with almost a 3-year investigation, just shy of 3-year investigation into the Phoenix Police Department and the city of Phoenix as a whole, came out with their findings. Not surprising to many based on what they've said in cities across the country. But then the questions began, how accurate is this report? Because now you don't have any specifics. These are their findings. Digging into some of the specifics and having the city answer for them is going to will come around. Also, not just the accuracy, but also entering into what they want is a consent decree and independent oversight in the Phoenix Police Department. Has this worked anywhere else in the country? The big question in this report, I shouldn't say big, but one of the overriding themes was about training and bad training within the department. So joining us is former PLEA president, Phoenix Law Enforcement Association president, and current executive director of the Arizona Police Association, Joe Kluwer. Joe, it's good to talk to you again.
Good to talk to you, Mike.
I wish the circumstances were different, but I know you were there yesterday with PLEA when they gave their press conference. I know you were one of the people that spoke. I want to ask you specifically about training because of your years in policing. Can you talk about the extensive training that officers not just go through to get a badge, but also continued throughout their careers? Any of what they accused Phoenix PD of as far as training goes, does that sound like the training you received or you know of?
Officers go through extensive training from the police academy throughout their entire career. It's mandatory to have a minimum amount of training, updating training every year for ASPO certification. So training is a constant evolving thing. I think what's more important is, I think you heard last night at the press conference at PLEA that more than willing to work and change and explore training options and what have you, that our biggest concern about this whole process is, number one, the lack of transparency in it and how the DOJ operates. They gave nobody a opportunity to review the report before they made their press conference, which means nobody could validate any of the information. So that's a start. But more importantly is whatever training comes about is how is that training going to be determined and decided. And we think a consent decree is an absolute disaster for the community, for the taxpayer, and for the police as well. It doesn't work. It's all about the money. You look at what's going on over at MCSO. They've been under a consent decree now, if you will, for over 10 years. And they recently, the Soros-backed sheriff, after 7 years, threw in the towel because he realized that it's a futile endeavor to try to please the monitors because they have an absolute conflict of interest where they're making a lot of money in these consent decrees, and they have no motivation whatsoever to find you in compliance because that would then kill the goose laying the golden egg. So it's just a disastrous mechanism situation.
Mm-hmm. And nobody
very, very welcome to. Go ahead.
Sorry, Joe. And when I'm looking at a chart, I have a list of charts about consent decrees and cities that have entered into them. The one that goes back the furthest is New Orleans PD. It goes back to 2010. That's 14 years. In 14 years, their budget has increased over 82%. Violent crimes are up 97%. In Seattle, it's up 52%. Albuquerque, 80%. Baltimore, almost 8%. Chicago, up 10%. These are all cities that have entered into consent decrees, and the crime statistics show that it doesn't improve policing or crime rates in the cities.
You're 100% correct, Mike. We know it. Everybody knows it. It is a disastrous program. Not to say that the DOJ can't come in, and we welcome them to come in, stand shoulder to shoulder, look at how we're doing things, see how Arizona Police works, and let's mutually find solutions. They don't want that. They want to control total local takeover of a police department and charge, frankly, screw the taxpayer for hundreds of thousands of dollars, millions of dollars,
right,
for something that can be accomplished in a much more simpler, expedient manner, especially when you have willing agencies and officers and associations that are willing to sit down at the table. That's what's missing from this.
I talked with Daryl Kripling yesterday on the show, the current plea president. I know you've served in that position. And one of the things I discussed and I wanted listeners to hear was that it's your job to represent and make sure officers are treated fairly. That's what your job is. But I also know that plea has been involved in a number of occasions when officers have done the egregious things, when they have acted inappropriately, that you have worked hard to make sure those officers were expelled from your ranks. Is that not true?
It's absolutely true. I've actually literally personally taken badge and guns off of a police officer in internal affairs because they were scared of how his reaction might have been. They asked me to do it because I had to report with him. I did it because it was obvious this guy didn't need to be a police officer. And we do that most of the time without incident, quietly, and send them down their way. It happens. We're just as concerned about policing in the community as anybody else. We want our community to trust the police. We want to be good partners in all of this. But it's never going to happen with the way the city of Phoenix is going about it, which is setting up these 100% non-law enforcement involved review boards is not going to develop trust, because trust is a two-way street, Mike.
Right.
If your wife trusts you, but you don't trust your wife, do you have trust in that marriage, in that relationship? No, because it takes both. The Phoenix Law Enforcement Association, the police department, we have been excluded from those discussions. We'd recommend that we all get on around the table and let's all discuss what's going on and how we fix it with the DOJ. But they, for some reason, want to exclude rank and file police officers, the guys that are actually out there on the street doing the most difficult job in the world, especially in these day and age, but yet they want us to trust them. And I'll tell you, the DOJ is probably the last people that you can trust, because how many federal agencies do you see wearing body cameras? How many recorded interviews they do with suspects or internal affairs? They don't. They operate completely opposite of how they're telling us we're supposed to and do as a routine practice and have for years. So they're really kind of hypocritical in their approach. They want to come off as all high and mighty and perfect, and they are anything but perfect. In fact, they should practice a little bit more about what they preach.
Joe, this is exactly why I wanted to have you on. I'm going to get the perspective of someone that spent years in law enforcement like you did, in leadership with plea and now with the Arizona Police Association. I appreciate the time today, and I look forward to having you back, because as this unfolds and more details come out, I'd love to have you come and talk about some of the specifics.
You bet. Thank you.
All right, that's Joe Kluwer from the Arizona Police Association. Incidentally, by the way, in this chart, Phoenix is there, that's under investigation. All these other cities that I told you about, big increases in crime. Phoenix has almost a 1% drop in violent crime. This chart goes back a while. 7% drop in other crimes, 2% to almost 2.5% drop in calls for service. Their staffing is down over 11%. Population has grown and the budget has grown. So they're showing green in a lot of these where other cities aren't.
Thanks for watching the Mike Broomhead Show. Tap to watch the first season of Amazing Arizonans, a KTAR News podcast. You can also click the button in the middle to subscribe.